The early projections were wrong. First, they were predicting millions of deaths if we didn't do anything. Then they said that if we did lock down, we could expect hundreds of thousands dead. We did lock down. We practiced social distancing. We built emergency field hospitals, and now we're seeing the result. The field hospitals are standing down most without treating any COVID-19 patients. We're also learning, now this study comes from the UK, so it's a bit different, but they ask, was Britain's full lockdown a waste of time? Scientists find blanket stay-at-home orders had little effect on curbing coronavirus outbreaks in Europe, but closing schools and banning mass gatherings did work. Stands to reason. All we really needed to do was practice social distancing. In fact, another study we saw the other day says that 66 of people who are getting infected now are staying at home. So there are more people who are locked down getting sick than people who aren't locked down, the essential workers. It stands to reason that we should be outside because you are less likely to get sick. It also stands to reason, well, we may have overreacted, and perhaps it was wrong to rush out and spend hundreds of millions of dollars building emergency hospitals. But I'll actually argue I don't think the hospitals were the wrong thing, though we are learning that they're standing down and they've never had a single patient. It's important to point out, as I've stated before, when someone forecasts a hurricane and we go out and board up windows and buy supplies, we don't later complain that the hurricane didn't come. We're glad it missed us. So in this regard, we saw the forecasts were incorrect, and we're lucky. It could have been so much worse. So we're basically dodging this storm. But I do think it's important to point out that in our overreaction, we actually caused serious damage with the economic shutdown. Now we're seeing multiple studies coming out showing that the mortality rate is very, very low, that more people had this than we realized. There's also some studies saying maybe the tests are wrong, so we really, really don't know. It makes a very difficult situation for us. But if we're now seeing that the lockdown was ineffective, according to one study in the UK, and that we don't actually need these hospitals, perhaps it's time to slowly start reopening, which is what many states are actually doing. Now, of course, we're still seeing Democratic states insist on extending their lockdowns. We're seeing New York City say, you're not allowed to go out and protest in violation of the First Amendment. But how much information is enough? Apparently, for tribal reasons, people just refuse to accept the lockdown didn't work, may have made things worse, or at the very least, it's time to reopen regardless. They're going to argue simply because they want to say Trump is bad, but I'll tell you what, they are helping Donald Trump. Let me tell you, man, and we'll read the story. Donald Trump, for the first 3 years of his presidency, had record-breaking economic numbers. Jim Cramer of CNBC, I believe CNBC, said, love Trump or hate him, these are the best numbers of our lives. So now that the economy is taking a major hit and unemployment is at like 14 or 15%, who's best equipped to get us back to normal? Joe Biden or Donald Trump? I'm sorry, the pandemic. It's Donald Trump. The economy was going really, really well. The pandemic wasn't his fault. I mean, it's a virus. It's an act of nature. And now Trump's, if he gets elected president, he'll probably fix the economy again. So in the end, the sustained lockdown just seems to benefit the president. This is what I can't stand about the Democrats and the left. They can't, there's no focus, there's no strategy, and they just hurt themselves in confusion every single time. Let's read about these hospitals. NPR reports, as hospitals were overrun by coronavirus patients in other parts of the world, the Army Corps of Engineers mobilized in the U.S., hiring private contractors to build emergency field hospitals around the country. The endeavor cost more than $660 million, according to an NPR analysis of federal spending records. But nearly 4 months into the pandemic, most of these facilities haven't treated a single patient. Check this out. This one in McCormick Place, Chicago, $65 million, 3,000 beds, 37 patients. Hey, at least they treated some people, right? Here's one in Colorado, $34 million, 2,000 beds, no patients. In fact, it looks like, according to this chart, only 3 of the hospitals they list actually had patients. Now, the Javits Center, with 1,900 beds, actually treated 1,095 patients. That makes sense. Early on, we were seeing tons of people go to hospitals, filming them saying, there's nobody here. What's going on? I thought these hospitals were overrun. We have seen endless TikTok cringe nurses wasting time doing stupid memes and just trying to one-up each other. And it's cringe. It is the cringiest trash I have ever seen. Clearly, most of these nurses were not in a panic or being overrun. But that's fine. That's normal. You see, the tribalists on the left will tell you, oh no, we're panicked. We don't have enough. And you'll find people on the right saying, why aren't these hospitals, full of people? What's going on? The truth is closer to the middle. Some hospitals were overrun. We needed this in New York. It worked. The hospital in New York worked. It was the right thing to do. Almost more than 50% capacity. Wonderful. There were other hospitals in New York that were not overrun. The example people often give to explain this is, McDonald's serves, like 1 billion, 2 billion people a year or whatever. One McDonald's could not handle all of that. So yes, we saw some hospitals completely overrun. The Javits Center picked up the overflow. We had that ship come into New York, but many places did not need their emergency field hospitals. So like I said, we can look at that. You can say we overreacted. But I think when we look at this, what we do now is we say, I still think it was the right thing to do. It's better safe than sorry. Perhaps it was too expensive. That's an argument that can be made. But in the future, let's assess this and use this information to improve what we have done. I'm not going to complain that we had emergency hospitals, man. That's the Army Corps of Engineers rushing in, contractors coming in, building something and doing something awesome. And I'm glad we didn't need to use them. However, we locked everything down in our panic, and it's seriously hurting us. They say public health experts said this episode exposes how ill-prepared the U.S. is for a pandemic. Oh, what? How do you conclude that? They praised the Army Corps for quickly providing thousands of extra beds, but experts said there wasn't enough planning to make sure these field hospitals could be put to use once they were finished. What? There was no people. We just saw that expose from Veritas where one hospital was staging their testing line. Or I shouldn't say the hospital was, but the line was staged, be it the news organization or the hospital. Somebody did it. We panicked. We set all this up. And for the most part, we didn't need it. That's fine. Just admit it. Just like I said with the hurricanes, we say, you know what? We did our best and we went a little over the top, but it's better safe than sorry. No, now they're trying to claim what really happened is that, it was a bureaucratic mess and we couldn't get them to be used. Nah, man, there weren't people to use them. Quote, it's so painful because what it's showing is that the plans we have in place, they don't work, said Robin Gershon, a professor at New York University's School of Global Public Health. We have to go back to the drawing board and redo it. What do you mean redo it? Redo what? But the nation's governors, who requested the Army Corps projects and in some cases contributed state funding, said they're relieved these facilities didn't get more use. They said early models predicted a catastrophic shortage of hospital beds, and no one knew for sure when or if stay-at-home orders would reduce the spread of the coronavirus. Perhaps what this public health expert in New York is saying, it's showing the plans we have in place don't work. Do you mean that we shouldn't have put up these hospitals? That's the only thing I can conclude. The governors aren't acting like people were blocked from going to the hospital. So what is the point you're trying to make? We have to go back and redo it. So you're saying, wait, this doesn't even make sense. Experts said there wasn't enough planning to make sure these field hospitals could be put to use. Are you arguing for more sick people? Like we should plan to get people sick? What's your point? It makes no sense. It sounds to me like what they're saying is there was a bureaucratic obstruction, but that's not the case. Absolutely not the case. Quote, all of those field hospitals and available beds sit empty today, Ron DeSantis of Florida said last month, and that's a very, very good thing. Gretchen Whitmer said, these 1,000-bed alternate care sites are not necessary. They're not filled, thank God. So who is this expert trying to argue that we made a mistake? Democratic Governor Whitmer, who everyone's mad at, and Ron DeSantis have both said, great, we didn't use them. We didn't need them. I mean, which Whitmer is straight up saying we didn't need them. Senior military leaders also said the effort was a success, even if the beds sit empty. General John Hyten, vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was asked at a news conference if it bothered him to see the field hospitals go unused. For gosh sakes, no. If you see beds full, that means the local capacity of the local hospitals to handle this has been overwhelmed. And now we're into an emergency situation. The Army Corps started building more than 30 field hospitals, retrofitting convention centers, and erecting climate-controlled tents in mid-March. Agency officials pushed to get these facilities done fast, limiting the bidding process and often negotiating directly with contractors they knew could deliver on time. I tell our guys, you have 3 weeks, Lieutenant General Todd Semonite, commander of the Army Corps of Engineers, said at a Pentagon news briefing in March. You get as much as you can done in 3 weeks, and then the mission is complete. We have a narrow window of opportunity. If we don't leverage that window of opportunity, we're going to miss it. At Chicago's McCormick Place, workers scrambled in April to transform the convention center into a massive temporary hospital with 3,000 beds, more than the biggest hospital in Illinois. This was an empty convention hall, J.B. Pritzker said during a news conference. while flanked by construction workers in hard hats and bright yellow vests. Monumental, round-the-clock dedication is what got this done before we need it, preparing for saving lives in the event that things become as bad as some have predicted. But just as construction got underway, states were issuing stay-at-home orders, and the spread of the coronavirus eventually began to slow. Work on the field, and actually, like I said, one study may have shown that may have made it worse, in which case, man, we really didn't need these. You know what, man? You can make the hurricane argument that I'm glad that it didn't hit us, but perhaps we need better experts. I mean, look, as much as many people seem to like Dr. Fauci, he was saying early on it wasn't a big deal. He was saying it was fine. He's been saying the same as everybody else. No one knew more than anyone else. Our experts got this wrong. So here's what we do. I'm not going to begrudge the experts for doing these things, for building these hospitals. We didn't need them. Good. We need to take this information into account moving forward, and then we need to start lifting the lockdown, start putting people back to work, start letting people go back to work, I should say. But instead, when you go on social media, you just hear people screeching like the world is ending as if they haven't even read any of the data. Like, what are you supposed to tell these people who are like, we can't reopen the country, it will get worse? What do you tell them when you're like, the hospitals are standing down? Like NPR. You love NPR, right? They're reporting this. Are they? Yeah, you know what, man? These conversations are pointless because people who want to maintain the lockdowns are ignoring the UN. They're ignoring the hunger, the supply chain breaking, the food chain, food supply chain shattering. They're ignoring it all. They don't care. They're not paying attention. And worse still, they think they know the science. They're like, science is on our side. You didn't read a single article, dude. Show them this. The hospitals are standing down. They're not being used. Please read this. Okay? I understand that if we reopen things, well, then maybe we might need some of these hospitals. That makes sense, right? If we slowly reopen, however, and that study previously is correct, that the lockdown made things worse, then things will get better. That's the science. You want to argue with me? Fine. You're arguing against the science. Can science be wrong? Yes, that's why it's science. But you can't simultaneously argue you're on the side of science and then dismiss multiple studies that have come out showing this. Look at this. Look at the story in Britain. They say draconian stay-at-home orders and shutting down all non-essential businesses had little effect on fighting coronavirus in Europe, according to a study. But the same scientists discovered closing schools and banning all mass gatherings did work in slowing outbreaks across the continent. Like I said, social distancing seems to work. The lockdown didn't. University of East Anglia researchers now say relaxing the stay-at-home policy and letting some businesses reopen could be the UK's first step to easing the lockdown. Excellent. The findings throw into question whether Britain's total lockdown announced on March 23rd was ever necessary amid claims social distancing policies announced on March 16th curbed the crisis on their own. Other leading scientists have claimed Britain's COVID-19 outbreak peaked and started to decline before the official lockdown began, arguing that Number 10's drastic policy to shut the UK down was wrong. Transport use plummeted, and fewer people were visiting GPs with telltale coronavirus symptoms the week before lockdown, suggesting the government's call for the public to work from home where possible and to only take essential travel was effective enough. And one Swedish researcher, Dr. John Giesecke, who has seen his country resist calls for a lockdown but escape relatively unharmed, said the pandemic is unstoppable and everyone will be exposed to the coronavirus sooner or later. It comes after Boris Johnson yesterday confirmed that strict rules imposed under the 6-week coronavirus lockdown will start to be eased on Monday. On the same day, the British death toll became the first in Europe to rise above 30,000, and the number of people diagnosed with the disease surged past 200,000. The Prime Minister will outline a 5-step plan for Britain's second phase on Sunday, with the government set to drop its stay-at-home message and replace it with stay safe. But as the UK and other countries in Europe prepare to lift restrictions, the World Health Organization has warned them not to be afraid of restarting them if the virus begins to take off again. In other developments to Britain's coronavirus crisis, and then they show a bunch of other stories, which we don't need to get into. The main point of this, I think it's fair to say that we have more than enough science on our side to say it's time to reopen. We're dealing with an economic crisis, a political crisis, and a health crisis. As it turns out, we may have made some mistakes along the way, but I'm glad that we did our best. We're wrong. You don't want to fault someone for trying. You just say, okay, now we know and we'll do better in the future. Knowing what we're knowing now, I think it's fair to say that it's time to reopen, lest we end up with, say, I don't know, a boogaloo of some sort. People who are showing up and protesting with weapons, saying, defying these lockdown orders, a salon owner getting arrested, the state Supreme Court of Texas overturning this. Yet we shouldn't be doing any of this. We're now dealing with an economic collapse because we locked down and we shouldn't have. But, hindsight is 2020. And now we're dealing with a political crisis because people are starting to freak out. In the U.S., our Constitution is being just stomped all over. New York City saying there's no right to protest anymore. Yeah, you can't do that. So it's time. It's enough. Enough. This story I find funny, however. Police complain they're becoming the villains of the pandemic as officers prepare to crack down on bank holiday sunbathers. Police fear talk of lifting COVID restrictions could cause problems this weekend. Why? The data says otherwise. Get off your high horse and read the science. Thousands of motorists are expected to defy restrictions to go to the beach. Others will head to beauty spots in the countryside for the long weekend. Police fear they will be seen as villains for enforcing the lockdown. Because you are. You guys see that viral tweet where it was some cops took a picture of their shadow and it said, think going to a rural area for a picnic, and you won't be caught. We'll pop out of the shadows and find you. It's like, what? Dude, you are the baddies. Now, look, I get it. The UK doesn't have a constitution. You guys don't have freedom, unfortunately. I'm half kidding, but really, I get it. You kind of don't. You got Count Dankula getting arrested for making a joke. Come on. In the U.S., we've had our problems, too. There have been people arrested for rap lyrics and stuff. But we have a constitution. We're still seeing the same thing. New York City saying no protest. What are you going to do? Arrest people? They have. They've violated the Constitution. So I'll tell you what. Any police officer in New York who is upholding a decree by the mayor, you need to stop, sit down, take a look at one of your buddies and go, are we the baddies? Yeah, because you are. Because apparently you were supposed to have sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution. And as soon as your boss was like, don't do that, you're like, okay, boss, I won't uphold the Constitution. Now, in the U.S., there are many sheriffs who are refusing to to enforce unconstitutional decree. These aren't laws. The governor coming out and saying, you can't do this is not a law. That's not how it works. You can't do that. Okay, we are not a monarchy or a despotism or whatever, a dictatorship. You can't just do that. Yet still we see police enforce these things. In Raleigh, we saw the cops say protesting is not an essential activity. Nice try. It doesn't matter what you think it is. But apparently these cops have not upheld their oath to the Constitution, or maybe many of them never even swore an oath in the first place. Many people call them the oath breakers. So if the cops are so concerned about being the villains, perhaps you should be paying attention to what the data is showing us. To do otherwise would be anti-science, in the United States, unconstitutional, a violation of civil rights and civil liberties, and a waste of our time and money. Man, it really does look bad. I'll tell you what. If again, hindsight being 2020, I think when this all first started, we all did what we needed to do and we all thought similar things. I mean, Nancy Pelosi and other Democrats like to drag Trump because he didn't move fast enough. Wow. Maybe now they're going to look really bad because as it turns out, Trump probably did too much because the lockdown didn't do anything. In which case, hindsight being 2020, they're going to have to backpedal again. Now I'll tell you what we can expect in the U.S. Democrats are going to come out and say, all of these studies are showing that the lockdown did more harm than good. And that was on Donald Trump. He bragged about how he shut the country down and he did all these things. You know what's coming. No matter what happens, it'll always be his fault. That's what I can expect. I can also expect to see tribal partisans being like a week late to the party. How many studies need to come out? How many reports need to come out? How much information do you need until you realize this isn't working? 130 million people face starvation according to the UN because we locked everything down. Well, perhaps we need to slowly start bringing things back, to work. We are. Okay, I get it. We are. But here you go. I'll wrap it up with this. U.S. field hospitals stand down, most without treating any COVID-19 patients. This should be enough for everyone. The hospitals weren't overrun. Some were. Javits Center was needed, but for the most part, we didn't need all of this. We went way above and beyond. I'm glad we did. Fine. Let's stop right now using the new data and get back to normal. And you know what? I'll say it one more time. Who's the man best equipped to fix the economy? Joe Biden or Donald Trump? Because we know that's what it comes down to. And Donald Trump has a history of the past 3 years of making the economy work. Sorry, it's not Joe Biden. You can hate Donald Trump. You can hate his foreign policy. You can hate his character and everything about him. But it's a fact. he will do better on the economy than Joe Biden ever could. So if your concern is the economy, well, then enough's been said. I'll leave it there. Stick around. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. youtube.com/Timcast. In the description below, there is a link. Click it. It's another YouTube channel. Go check it out. I have more content right there, and I will see you all then.